I would be complex, I would be cool. They'd say I played the field before I found someone to commit to. And that would be okay for me to do. Every conquest I had made would make me more of a boss to you.
Welcome to the New York Times Podcast, your homemade DIY totemic merchandise item of music news and criticism. I'm your host, John Caramonica.
What's that like? I'm so sick of running as fast as I can.
Back from the desert. I went to the desert for y'all. Glendale, Arizona. Opening night, Taylor Swift Eras Tour. Maybe you were there. There were 70,000 people there. Maybe you were there and I didn't see you. If so, hello. Maybe you watched on a TikTok live stream. Or maybe you are sitting tight waiting for the tour to come to a stadium near you. There's a lot to talk about as far as the tour, the set list, big picture statements that Taylor has been making with the show and in adjacent territory. And also in the fan energy, both in the room and on the internet. Joe Coscarelli is here.
Hello, live from Tumblr. We're back.
Joe is the first podcast guest to be coming from inside a social network.
Yeah.
He's been fully borged. He's the lawnmower man of Tumblr.
We're going to have to talk about the different mode of Swiftie depending on the social network, because I think we're gearing up for a war.
Some of the things you were texting me yesterday certainly seem to indicate that. So different social network Swifties and also just different levels of engagement Swifties.
No locals on this pod.
No, of course not. Like never, like literally exiled. We're going to go back home. At the beginning, we were listening to The Man. The Man was one of the first songs that Taylor played in a 44-song set list that took over 3 hours. Now, I do want to say this. You go to these shows, you stay up late to write the review, and every now and again you leave something out because it's just late at night and you're not thinking. And I do want to say that one thing that I regret not mentioning is just the sheer stamina required for doing a show of this scale, 3+ hours, this many songs. It's very, very impressive. Even if there were sections of the show, folklore, that didn't quite hit as hard for me. Evermore. Even if there were little sections.
We're gonna tease all this out once and for all, but you keep going for now.
There were little segments that maybe I was like, I could do without this. We could condense this. We can compress this. But the sheer athletic spectacle should be addressed. It was incredibly impressive to watch. And the fact she did it 2 nights in a row and then another 2 nights in Vegas and so on and so forth, it should be applauded. So shout out to that. That said, the show I thought overall really enjoyable, despite little moments that maybe didn't do it for me personally. It was amusing to hear Taylor acknowledge the TikTok dissatisfaction with Evermore.
Okay, so but we need to clear this up though, because I think that you might be slightly misreading this. So tell me what happened, and then I'll do the TikTok forensics on it.
Either leading into the Evermore segment or sometime in the middle of the Evermore segment. The show, I should say, if you have not been paying attention, it's the Eras Tour. She performed songs from each one of her albums. Some albums, many more songs, some very few, obviously indexing heavily towards more recent albums. Evermore, she described as, I think the quote was, an album I love, despite what some of you say on TikTok.
I think what she's referring to there is that the joke among the Swifties is that she doesn't love Evermore. Not that they don't love it, but that it's her least loved child because she spent the least amount of time promoting it.
I see what you're saying. I mean, and of course, Swifties love everything with equal passion and abandon, which is something that I have learned time and again.
Yeah, I think it took on this reputation because they like to grade sort of her promotion of each album, hence eras, right? We should talk about this idea of an era, because it's also funny that playing some songs from all of your albums is also known as a tour.
Yes, like literally just like a totally normal way to play a song.
Right.
Can I briefly interrupt you before you continue that thought?
Yeah.
Joe, am I a Swiftie?
This is tough because I often have to think about this myself. I mean, we are two grown men talking for the umpteenth time.
We're definitely men.
Yeah.
like we're definitely men.
Right.
I cannot. The other stuff.
But we are now spending work hours once again dissecting like the minutia of a pop star who is, you know, chiefly for young women, right? Like that's like
I sort of the four thing I don't think that's how these things really are. I understand that's how they function, but I don't think that's how they really are. But anyway, continue.
I just want to say like our dedication to continuing to try to provide nuance and context and analysis around the career of inarguably one of the most important artists of our lifetime. I think it transcends journalism and criticism, but I don't know that it enters Fandom. You know what I mean? Like, I think that we are students of the Swifties. We are sometimes antagonists of the Swifties, but we are, I think, adjacent to them ultimately.
Is Swiftydom purely Fandom?
If it's merely a matter of engagement, then yes, we are Swifties. If it is about a sense of devotion and a sense of like infallibility or perceived infallibility of your star, then I think that's where we take the exit off of Swiftie highway. You know what I mean?
But I guess my question is the category of Swiftie umbrella big enough to include people who have skepticism about certain aspects of the Swift oeuvre or experience?
Here's what I'd say for myself, and I'm interested in your answer, is that I'd probably be doing this to some extent, maybe slightly lesser, but I'd be keeping up even if it weren't my job. So take that as you will. And I think that probably goes for you too. I mean, you've certainly been here a long time.
Since Tim McGraw.
Right.
Obviously, it's a matter of professional interest / concern, but I do feel that the level of curiosity and also the joy and pleasure of listening to this music is something that is bigger than a professional concern. I wouldn't do it professionally to this scale if I didn't feel that way. So I sort of wonder if there's room for, in the theoretical Swiftie community, for reasonable principled dissent for certain moments, but still kind of like, you can still like get the tattoo.
Sure. Yes.
I do feel like that's where I live. Like, I feel like I'm in the community, but also it's like part of being in a democracy is you can speak out against the democracy, you know? But Swiftydom is not a democracy.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think there's a groundswell of people who would love to exile you from the island.
Certainly seems that way.
And I will say, and you know, we've been over this before, but like Taylor Swift's probably one of the earliest things you and I bonded over more than a decade ago at this point, and that we could engage like at a certain level on the subject, even though, of course, she was already a famous pop star, but like we could go a little deeper than that. But I think what's become very clear in the intervening years is that we also have very different opinions of what good Taylor is now more than ever. And when I look at your parenthetical of songs she should have played.
Oh, did it blow? Did that blow your head off?
I mean, I can get behind some of it. Like, okay, who doesn't want to hear White Horse? Which I think has since been played on the tour. Picture to Burn, fine. Dear John, I think we all agree. Top 3, Taylor, dead or alive. Okay, Stay.
Yeah, I took some heat for that on Twitter. I took some heat for that.
That's like bottom 3 Taylor songs.
But okay, so there's a couple things about this particular list, and I'm glad that you drew attention to it, because it was probably the most fun I had at like 4 a.m. that night.
It feels a little delirious.
It is a little delirious. But I was thinking a lot about, if you're Taylor, if you're taking the Eras concept seriously, if you're engaging with it seriously, I agree with what you said before. It's like Eras is just like, I played some new songs, I played some old songs. Like,
I played more new songs. She happens She happens to have 4 albums that have come out since the last time she toured. Not even counting Taylor's version, because Lover, Folklore, Evermore, Midnights, plus the re-recordings. She's put out an obscene amount of music since she last played these shows. And so, of course, she's playing mostly from those 4 albums.
First of all, let's just listen to Stay, Stay, Stay. Let's just...
Oh, God, let's not.
No one else is gonna love me when I get mad, mad, mad. So I think that it's best if we both stay, 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 stay. I've been loving you for quite some time.
Okay, so the point that we were both making is that the Eras Tour, I apologize to everybody, but this is not like a radical concept. I played a bunch of new songs and I also played some old songs. Like, that's how a lot of tours work for legacy artists, which Taylor is certainly, if not one, is certainly like heading in that direction. So it's not that shocking. But I was thinking about eras in a different way, which is, like, let's take Dear John, for example. That song, I don't think Taylor will ever play live.
Unless she does like a Jay-Z type thing where she does a B-sides show.
Right. But it's too specific. It's too much about the era of its birth. Many of the songs that she played, especially older ones, are obviously the kind of like undeniable big tent, big picture hits. It's stuff that everybody knows and everybody can agree on. But often, if we think of things that are emblematic of an era, they are the things that not everybody took with them because they were so specific to 2012, 2016, 2007, whatever. They're so specific to that moment that you almost feel weird porting it into the future. And so when I was making this list, I wasn't necessarily saying, this is my favorite song from this album that was not performed. I was saying, here are some songs that kind of maybe only could have been made in those moments. And if we're really talking eras, we're talking eras, not to get all Allen Iverson, but like, we're talking eras. If we're really talking eras, I would have been psyched.
The most representative songs from an era.
Exactly. That is what I was alluding to. And on this list, there's 10 songs on this list. Maybe like 4 of these songs to me are like 10s. There's some are 7s. Maybe once we're tilting towards later albums, maybe there's like a 5 or a 6 in here, you know. But like, to me, I was trying to make a point, and maybe I didn't quite nail it earlier in the paragraph, but I was trying to make a point that the Eras conceit is like a little bit false, because a true Eras conceit would walk you through crazy highs, weird lows, left turns, unexpected pivots. It would really be deeper as a narrative experience. And the way that this tour was organized was not a deep narrative experience. It really was just like pummeling at the head, hit after hit after hit, except for these little stretches of the more recent albums that are kind of like, what are we doing here exactly?
I get this. So I think for it to have been a true Eras tour, which is basically like a survey of my rich career, I would have wanted it to go chronologically, which is like tough for a set list and not what a stadium tour often looks like. But I think if you really want to drive home the concept of progression,
it's like we're talking about K-pop. It's like we're taking seriously the marketing, and it's like, it's just marketing.
No, I
regret to inform all the people who wish me exiled from the Swiftie community that this is simply a marketing approach.
And underlined in this is the fact that when you're talking about Fearless, you're getting Love Story, You Belong With Me, and the title track. When you're talking about Red, you're getting 22, Never Getting Back Together, I Knew You Were Trouble, and All Too Well. You're just getting hits. I understand, but I think nobody needs to hear that song live.
Again, it was obviously designed as a provocation.
Can we talk about another provocation that you made in this review?
Not in this list.
No, not in this list, but in this review in general. And I want to hear about how this played out at the show.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Everybody who keeps up with our coverage of Taylor Swift knows you don't like Folklore and Evermore. You love Reputation. You're constantly going to fight for its rightful place in the catalog. Fine. All that. Like,
I'm so glad that the rest of the world is finally catching up to me on that, by the way.
Like, all right, we know.
Has it been hard being this wrong for this long? Couldn't be me. Simply couldn't be me. But let me know. Let me know how that went.
And we'll be here when you're ready to admit that Folklore is her best album. But like pound for pound. But
oh my God.
The point that I want to get to is that you talk about Red as the pop turning point, very obviously leaving out 1989 as the move to pop. Tease that out for me a little bit, because I know what you mean, but I want to hear you explain it.
1989 is fait accompli pop Taylor. By the time that record comes around, there's no dispute about what she's doing. There's no dispute about the direction. There's no question. Like, I wish we can go back to, what year is that? 2013, 2014, something like that?
Sure.
I wish we could go back to that year, 3 months before the record came out, and think about what our conversations were like. But I'm willing to bet they were not, is she still going to make a country record? Like, is she still in dialogue? I'm willing to bet by that point, we were all in agreement that this was a done deal. We just didn't know what it was going to sound like, but we knew what it wasn't going to sound like. Red, that was not the case. So when I'm talking about that pivot, I remember vividly, I know exactly where I was when I first heard the big hits off Red. I remember exactly what they were played for me by someone. I remember literally like the view out the window of the room, because it was such a jolt. It was such a hard twist. And it made me realize that the universe was opening up and shifting. I did not feel that on 1989. There was almost nothing on 1989 that made me feel disoriented, whereas the pivots on Red were disorienting, both for me and I think for Taylor and her career. I didn't even think of that as a contentious statement, because to me, the sort of awakening, the seismic awakening that I had, I know everybody else had.
I don't think it's contentious as much as I think it's more specific, more nuanced, and actually more correct than the conventional wisdom, which is that 1989 is her turn to pop. But I think you're right that the gap between Mean and Speak Now and Dear John and Back to December, like the hits from Speak Now to We're Never Ever Getting Back Together, 22, and I Knew You Were Trouble, is a larger gap than from I Knew You Were Trouble to Shake It Off. That is defensible. It felt like you were leaving out the conventional wisdom of 1989 on purpose.
I guess just when you know the truth, you don't even think about what other people think are the conventional wisdom. So that's weird.
Right.
No, I didn't. I know what you're talking about, but like I spent some time going over the old albums before the show because I wanted to think, what did I think the actual errors were? Like, to the degree that I was willing to concede that the errors conceit was like a worthwhile conceit, I was trying to figure out, well, what are those eras? There's 10 albums, but there are not 10 eras of Taylor Swift. Maybe there's 4 eras of Taylor Swift. Maybe 5, generously. Maybe it's like 3 major eras and like 2 minor eras, if we're playing that game. And so that statement at the top of the review was really a byproduct of this kind of upfront thinking about, well, where are the true pressure points? Where are the true pivots? Where is the day where we go to sleep on Thursday night and Taylor Swift is one kind of artist, and we wake up on Friday morning and she's a totally different kind of artist? To me, Red is really the first moment after the first album where you can say that shift is happening.
So you consider Red and 1989 one era, basically, and everything Speak Now prior is
yes,
1.0
the first 3
Taylor.
albums. It's obviously, it's not that there are not microgradations. It's not that there are not improvements or adjustments, but in a big picture, if we're really taking the conceit seriously, I think those first 3 albums can fit under one umbrella. And I think the 4th and 5th album fit under a separate umbrella.
Well, then tell me this. So the show begins with Lover, which was supposed to be the pandemic era tour, and it ends with Midnights, which is the obvious, the now era. This would have been a Midnights tour if the last couple of years have been normal. And then Folklore and Evermore is a sort of tributary, like a one-off little micro era, whatever. Did you feel like the beginning and the end of the show worked best? Just because those seem to be the centerpiece of the tour. Is that how it felt in the room?
Let's listen to 22 right now, because when I think of things that were absolutely hitting in this room, 22, All Too Well, You Belong With Me. So let's listen to 22 and then we'll come back to what things maybe we're not hitting. Be right back. We're back. It's me. It's Joe. We're talking Taylor. Okay, so to your question about what worked well, or did the Lover and Midnight segments work well? You have to remember that the Lover segment opens the show. And this is the first time anyone has seen Taylor on stage in 4 years.
More,
I think, or more, yeah. So
yeah,
I think
4 and change.
De facto, it worked well. Because the enthusiasm was at such an astronomical level. Like, she could have played Evermore songs at the beginning of this tour and people would have lost their minds. Look, she opened with Miss Americana and the Heartbreak Prince, which is not a Taylor song for me.
But it goes directly into Cruel Summer,
which
everyone's been waiting for.
The Man, which also is an A song to me. You Need to Calm Down, which is like an A- song to me.
Wow, you're getting weird already, but keep going.
Okay. I'm simply saying that whatever she chose to open with, I think would have hit incredibly hard. But I do not feel that the opening segment of Lover songs, nor the closing segment of Midnight songs, felt particularly emblematic. They felt kind of like the starch that gets you to the protein.
And then the protein is the greatest hits.
To me, the protein was the older stuff. And look, I want to be really clear about this. There were people who were excited to see the Folklore and Evermore segments, but it was distinctly fewer than people who were excited to hear the older stuff. There were a lot of fans there. I felt like they were in their 30s. They'd probably been going to Taylor tours for 10, 15 years. Their associations with Taylor are the older hits. And it was noticeably quieter in the arena during the Folklore segment and during the Evermore segment, and not simply because the songs are quieter. I think the reception was chillier.
I also think they're not built for a stadium. If these albums would have come out at a normal time, which they may not even have been made in a normal time, they sound the way they do in part because of the limitations of the COVID moment. But I think we probably would have seen a stripped back Taylor tour, a full band mandolini type tour. I think she would have targeted a live show towards these records and what they sound like if given the opportunity. Those are still the songs I want to hear live because I haven't heard them live. And when I've been skipping through, the videos that are online so far, I'm most interested to see what August and Illicit Affairs and Invisible Strings sound like, because I have no idea, because I've never seen Taylor play songs like that live.
And look, we've talked about this during the rollout for Folklore and Evermore. These are not albums designed to be toured in the way that a current mode Taylor album is designed to be toured. And this is where Midnights comes into the conversation, because at least for me, Midnights is a good but not great Taylor album. It's a bit of a mishmash. The closing segment from Midnights felt confusing to me, but it is indisputably designed to be played at this scale. And I think when you are a star at this level with this amount of brand weight to continue to carry, you have to keep making records that sound like those records in order to keep the stadiums full, not simply full with people, but full with sound. The odds that Taylor is going to all of a sudden change and start doing like an Ed Sheeran thing where she just sits in the middle of a stadium with a piano and a guitar and holds 70,000 people wrapped, that seems unlikely, even though she could do it. Let's play her singing Tim McGraw, unaccompanied, or relatively, I forget if it was totally unaccompanied, but acoustic. Let's play a little bit of that, because I damn near lost it when this happened on opening night. So let's check out a little bit of that. Could she do a version of that? Taylor unplugged in a stadium, all the eras, various hits. Could she do that? Yes. Would the Folklore, Evermore parts of her catalog make more sense in that setting? Absolutely. That's a possibility. Maybe that's her future. Like, I don't think Taylor's going to be doing full choreography tours into her 50s. I think that's unlikely.
Yeah, she's going to be sitting on a stool at some point. And that can be just as powerful, if not more, than I think like 808s and choreography.
I actually would really be curious. And the Sheeran example is, I think, worth taking under consideration because it demonstrates that it's possible to do that. But those segments, the Folklore and Evermore segments, I like some of those songs better hearing them live with like the full power of that setup, but they didn't line up with the rest of the show. Maybe they should have been combined into one segment. It was like a middle of the show acoustic setup, where she goes out to this middle of the floor and holds people's attention super rapt for like 20 minutes. That might have been a better approach to it. But when you're trying to do everything at one scale level, you're really like hoovering up all this material that may not naturally fit at that scale and trying to paint it with those same colors. And it just doesn't quite work.
It's interesting because during the Reputation tour, which is like, it was an arena tour, but those were songs made for an arena, right? Like they hit really hard, they full production, costumes, dancers, sets, all of that. And she sort of tried out this thing that she's doing now, the like one or two acoustic one-off songs per night. But it was a total swing from the full scale main show. Whereas the Reputation tour had these two extremes. You had the full scale arena moment, and then you had the little bit of acoustic songs. This one seems to have an in-between, a three mode thing where you have the full scale, the little acoustic songs, and then the Folklore Evermore stuff, which is sort of 1 foot on each side.
Yeah, although what I would say is the most intimately scaled thing, the pure acoustic thing, the Tim McGraw moment, there was there was very little of that. It wasn't like she dipped into it, came back to it, circled back, up, down, around. It was really just, we're arriving at a point in the night where we're going to calm it down. We're going to hold it there for, let's say, I guess the All Too Well 10-minute version sort of function like that as well. But we're going to hold it there briefly, but we're going to immediately pull back from it. The Folklore Evermore things seemed like, how do we, in essence, put a big puffy coat on this like very, very, very like summery outfit? How do we pretend it's meant for another season? And it's just not meant for that season.
I think this tour is probably too big, too well-oiled of a machine to change much as it goes along. But I think it would be interesting to see how she would readjust now that she's seen how it plays on the road in front of 70,000 people. I mean, like, the main thing that jumps out to me is just like, how do you do 5 songs after Antihero, which is like arguably the best single of your career, and a total like reassumption of the throne? Like, why do you play 5 worst songs after that? I just don't understand that.
Okay, so a couple things. One, I know that in the show I saw in Arizona, the fan reaction was much quieter for the later album segments, number one. But also I know people who went in Vegas and said something very, very similar. So I do think there is a little bit of like gum in the wheels during those segments that's maybe not totally connecting. That's one thing. To your point about the Midnight's run, I agree. When she played Antihero, I was cool. I was like, cool, show's over. Like, great. Like, okay, we're done. Solid, way to go out. High fives all around. And then it kept going.
I have the Midnight's run.
Midnight Rain, Vigilante Ship, Bejeweled, Mastermind, Karma. Ended on Karma. Y'all are mad at me about saying I would like to hear Stay, Stay, Stay. What about Karma?
Karma's the Stay, Stay, Stay of the Midnight's era, for sure.
What are we talking? Like, literally, like, please. Anyway, I think the thing that did not work for me on Midnight's the album, the kind of like synthetic through line of a lot of those songs, the saccharine syntheticness or the synthetic saccharine-ness of a lot of these songs, even if I didn't love the order in which they were played at this show, they did kind of make sense. There's a kind of like not to be all like physics, but like, gas expands to like fill the space allotted.
Okay, sure,
right?
if you say so.
That's, unlike a liquid or a solid, which maintain their volumes, gases don't have an inherent volume. They expand to the volume of the space.
Okay.
That's how I felt about I promise. I promise.
All
I got
right.
a 5.
Yeah. I'm not fact checking you. We're rolling with it.
That's how I felt about these songs from Midnights. That given the opportunity to fill the stadium, they did that work in a way that the prior two albums, the songs from those albums, didn't necessarily, or some did, but many didn't. These songs, because of the nature of their production, because of the thickness of their production, and there's not a lot of breathing space in those songs. On the album, I found that a little bit suffocating because the stuff that was being like crammed into these songs, I found like a little bit tough to swallow. But given the full room of a stadium, there was something kind of absorbing, almost like hypnotic about that run of songs. And again, these are songs I don't like on their own very much. But for those 10 or 15 minutes, all sort of like stitched together in one like mega mix, they started to kind of make sense. I was surprised. It wasn't what I was expecting. It wasn't like a 10 out of 10 moment for me, but it wasn't like a 4. I kind of bought it, even though, as you say, like Anti-Hero is like the obvious peak of this record. And after she played it, I was like, cool, Lavender Haze, Anti-Hero, great. We did it. I was really surprised with how they were deployed and how effective they were. Even if, again, minute for minute, second for second, song for song, I don't think they totally work. Like, I don't think of Taylor as like an artist like, Future or Post Malone or whatever, or someone for whom all the songs can kind of bleed together sometimes. And you feel like you're listening to one long song, because her songwriting is a totally different form of songwriting. And her ability to craft things at 3.5 minute clips that have like the full narrative arc is almost unmatched in the contemporary pop marketplace. Those 15 minutes at the end, though, almost felt like kind of like Post Malone, or it felt like I'm telling you one big story using these 4 or 5 songs as like similar consonant paint colors.
There's something sort of advanced on one hand about this set list. And I want to bring this back to the fandom, but the more by the books way to have done this, I think, are to take that whole Midnight section, not to totally fan fiction this into my dream set list, but I think that this is how it would work in your average pop star stadium tour. You take all the Midnight songs and you do them first instead of the Lover songs, but you hold Anti-Hero. Then you could do the Lover songs, which was supposed to be the last tour, but you hold probably Cruel Summer. And then Anti-Hero and Cruel Summer become saved for the last segment of smashes, basically. And then you go from the most recent albums to some greatest hits, then you do a couple deep cuts, then you do some more greatest hits, and then you do like a knockout closing run. And this show is very much not that. And I wonder if part of it, and I think that this is also goes to the length question, is about value and is about providing value and fan service, hitting the most amount of marks for the most amount of people, given how the pent up demand, B, the price point of how expensive it is. You're going to bring 2 kids to this show with a parent and you're going to drop what, like 10 grand after merch?
Yeah, you're going to sell, right, you're going to sell your house.
And also the length of it, like much has been made online about how the Taylor Swift set on the current tour is now longer than the Bruce Springsteen set on his current tour, where she's finally passed him. And like, I remember even at Reputation tour 5 years ago thinking, it's getting a little long. We're talking stamina, both for the crowd and the artist. But I wonder if, because of everything that's happened, and I'm sure the set list was made before the Ticketmaster debacle, but when you take into account everything, is this tour just the best value for the most Taylor Swift fans, regardless of the flow of the thing, if it's the appropriate story being told?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's like us even having the debate is us taking the marketing conceit more seriously than it deserves to be taken.
But if she wanted to make a set list that flowed the best, it might look different than the set list that was going to please the most amount of people and make them feel like they got their money's worth, especially if they're just checking boxes of like, how many of my favorite Taylors did I see tonight?
You're saying that it could have been a different flow, even if she still aggregated all the songs from particular albums together.
With a few sliced out to make like a proper stadium finale, basically, where you play your 5 biggest hits in a row.
I just do think the very nature of these last 4 albums create this problem where you have 2 of those albums that very simply do not function in this context. And because of that, I mean, I think the solution to that would have been to merge them into one segment instead of have them in 2 distinct segments. But because of that, you had to create a set list that went so high that the come down, by the time you realize that you've come down, you're already like 2/3 of the way into that segment. And then you got to like get lifted back out of it. And then the same thing happens again after. It's something that's like true to the idea that those are eras that are worth preserving, protecting, amplifying, and sharing on their own terms. But it did not necessarily land in this context where I think if she had played all the hits up through Lover, let's say it's the same exact date, same exact tour setup, but nothing from Folklore, nothing from Evermore, nothing from Midnights even. I think those fans would have been as happy, maybe even a little bit more happy, because the average peak height of the songs would have been higher.
Okay. Even for people who may have gotten into Taylor in the last 5 years.
Can't relate. I've been here since song 1. I can't relate.
Well, then let's talk. Like, what was the show like in terms of Swifties versus locals? Like, how many people were there because this was the hottest, most expensive ticket, and how many people were there because they've dedicated their life to uncoding Easter eggs?
I think because it was the first show of the tour, I think it was a lot of real Swifties. I saw a lot of customized garments. I saw a lot of vintage Taylor merchandise. And I think I said this earlier, but I saw a lot of groups of fans who looked like they were on their like 4th Taylor tour together. You know, people who went to tours in 2012, 2014, and are still going with the same group of friends. I thought the average age was a little bit higher than I was expecting. I'm used to a pretty young average age at a Taylor tour. And it's not that there weren't kids there, but I think the average age was higher. And I think if you are in your, let's say, mid to late 20s or early to mid 30s, you're only going to pay the price that these tickets cost if you are a dedicated fan. I'm not saying that people didn't just show up and be like, okay, there's nothing to do in Glendale this weekend, I guess I'll go see Taylor. I'm sure there's some of that. But I thought that there were more fans than kind of casual drive-by fans. I think, again, the opening night thing was important. It's tough for me to know how Vegas played or how Tampa, shout out Tampa, how Tampa will play or Detroit or Minneapolis. But I think the people who made a point of being there on opening night, that was not a casual crowd, which again, why it was so surprising during the moments when I felt the room was quiet. It's like you shouldn't be in a stadium of 70,000 people and be like, damn, it's low-key quiet in here. That's weird. Talk about the locals thing. Can you explain that a little bit more for people who aren't up on that?
What I've seen, from Swifties online and the way that they're reacting to the tour is that they feel like there are a lot of casual Taylor fans there. They call them locals, meaning they're not about it. And I wonder if they're interpreting a sort of innate lack of enthusiasm for certain songs as people being in the building that don't deserve to be there in a sort of way that protects Taylor. These songs aren't hitting live. It's easier for them to blame bad fans than it is to say, maybe these songs are not built for a stadium. But I think maybe they haven't seen as many stadium shows as you or I, and they don't necessarily know what kind of song fits in what kind of room.
And also just even that idea of protecting Taylor. It's protecting Taylor from knowing that some songs don't hit as hard as others. It seems
right.
Okay, that's Taylor knows. I promise you, Taylor knows.
Yeah. It's interesting because one of the other subplots, though, I think, and this is Swifties making the point that there are more new fans there, or fans that quote unquote don't deserve to be there, aren't as big of Swifties as they are, is that they are being bullied in some way by the newer fans. You have accounts from old Taylor fans saying that they're being like filmed for TikToks that are making fun of them when they're like freaking out, or when they've made their own outfits at home, or, when they go really hard in the sort of like Comic-Con style, like, I'm cosplaying whatever aspect of my fandom. I saw one clip that was like a group where they all had a different line from Karma on their shirts. So when the song came around, they, the TikTok films each of them.
Oh, I saw that. Yeah.
That sort of thing. But apparently, again, this is all alleged. You don't know. I don't know how many times this is actually happening, but the idea that more casual fans are filming the real fans as if they're like freaks, which is like a very funny sort of intra stadium war.
Okay, but based on your parallel life as a Tumblr Swiftie, do you feel that there is a new generation of Taylor fans that's like lover or post-lover, like folklore onwards, that experiences Taylor or Taylor fandom differently than the 1.0 generation or the earlier generations?
And this is what I was alluding to at the beginning of the podcast when I said there's maybe a war brewing between different social network Swifties. And this comes mostly from some observation of my own, but also from the reporting that I did ahead of the tour about Taylor fans who were working to get each other tickets because the Ticketmaster on sale was such a disaster. Basically, a bunch of Swifties building upon systems built by Harry Styles fans and BTS fans, facilitating basically hand-to-hand face value tickets. And in speaking to some of these Swifties, the ones who were organizing tended to be older, they tended to have more disposable income, were flying to shows themselves, but then helping younger fans get tickets at a fair price. They sort of explained to me this dynamic in which, because Taylor used to be on Tumblr and engaging with her fans there. I wrote a story about this ahead of Lover, how that was sort of their safe space, even after people had moved on from Tumblr. And according to these Swifties, now that Taylor moved to TikTok to promote Midnights, all of the Swiftie energy has moved to TikTok because that's where she's, liking posts and sort of popping up in people's comments or followers. And so most of the main energy has moved to TikTok, as it has in general. But I think the Swifties sort of stuck around older social networks longer because Taylor was doing so. I think it's possible that there is this generation of people who have come to Taylor super fandom via TikTok, and that has less of maybe like it has a shinier, less musty feel than like the 30-year-olds from the Fearless era who are still posting on Tumblr. Like that dynamic makes sense to me. The sort of generations of indoctrination is interesting because the last piece of this is performing Taylor fandom in order to be plucked for the meet and greet. Taylor is one of the few pop artists that does not charge for a meet and greet, because obviously that would be the prices could be astronomical, and then you would have all sorts of debates about inequality,
the ethics of it.
The ethics of it. Like, so what she and her team do and have done for many years is pluck people both from online and from at the show, of people who can then come back and meet Taylor. When I saw her last on Reputation, she was doing them before and after the show, which I think like is just a superhuman.
Talk about
amount.
Stamina. Like for real.
After recording a podcast with you, I have to take a nap. You know what I mean? And that's like 1 hour a day. So she's performing for 70,000 people and meeting fans who are having the most intense moment of their life, both before and after the show. But one thing that the fans seem to have noticed this time around is that she's plucking what they call the littles, kids, basically. So adult Swifties are being overlooked for the meet and greet in favor of the next generation of gatekeepers.
Can I be cynical about that?
Yeah. I mean, it's pure Taylor in that it is both benevolent and it's
optically generous and also completely savvy.
Yes.
Okay, if we're going to think of terms like if you and I were not a critic and a reporter, but instead we worked at a record label or a management company, we would be talking in terms of lifetime value of a fan. What is a fan worth to Taylor Swift? Let's say a fan is worth, these are fake numbers, but let's say a fan is worth $10,000, like a true fan is worth $10,000 to Taylor Swift. Fake number. I'm sure it's more. Are you going to super serve the people from whom you have extracted $9,500 of those $10,000? Or are you going to super serve the people who have only given you $500 of their $10,000? You're probably going to super serve the latter group because that's who's going to carry you through the next phase of your career.
Yeah.
God, that's dark. That's dark.
I know, but it's business. Here's the last thing I'll say about the way that social networks are interplaying with fandom. There's a lot of controversy over Twitter, the For You feed, and what it might become when legacy checkmarks, are pay for play only. But I will say, having reported a Taylor Swift story in the last few weeks, my For You page is now serving me all of this Swiftie content where I'm learning about all of the ins and outs of the little battles that they're fighting amongst each other. And I will say, for journalistic purposes, it's quite effective.
When they remove your legacy blue check, you going to pony up $8 and expense it?
It's a great question. I might have to do it, but then I have to put in my bio that I'm only doing it for work. So no one thinks I bought the blue check just because I need the blue check.
Crazy. You tell me a song that you saw a video of and you're like, damn, this goes, from the later album, from Folklore Evermore, let's say.
The fact that she did Illicit Affairs, but she did only the bridge. She could have just not played Illicit Affairs because that's like a deep, deep cut. But it was nice to get at least the bridge because it's a killer A+, 10 out of 10 Taylor bridge.
That is our show. Also, I do want to say, I feel like later in the summer, once more people have had the chance to go see the tour, we may come back for a speed round with some more folks. We did the table setting, but I think come July, August, we might have an opportunity for a different kind of conversation, especially if the tour does evolve a little bit. So be on the lookout for that. Listen to every podcast ever at nytimes.com/podcast. Get the shirts. We are basically sold out of the black shirts. I have like a couple of, I think, smalls left. So get the shirts. It's the podcast.myshopify.com. Subscribe to podcast anywhere you get your audio content, Apple, Spotify, et cetera, et cetera. Email us, podcast@nytimes.com, get in the Facebook and get in the Discord, tinyurl.com/podcast Facebook/podcast Discord. Our producer, as always, is Pedro Rosado from Headstepper Media. We will be back next week. This is Illicit Affairs.
And you wanna scream, don't call me kid, don't call me baby. Look at this godforsaken mess that you made me.